What happened between the moment that the OBR said that there was a £4.2 billion surplus and the moment that Rachel Reeves said that there was actually a £30 billion black hole? Explain to me how all of a sudden the narrative has changed.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Julian Discourse. Have you ever noticed that when the establishment wants to raise your taxes, they magically discover a massive economic crisis out of nowhere? In this explosive TalkTV clash, watch Alex Phillips absolutely grill Labour Treasury Minister James Murray over Rachel Reeves's narrative of a 30 billion black hole. While Labour claims the sky is falling to justify their budget, Alex confronts him with official government forecasts, proving they sat on a multi-billion-pound surplus the entire time. Hit subscribe and let's watch the elite narrative collapse in real time.
Now, first of all, I want to ask you about the budget and some research that's been done by the Centre for Social Justice, which has calculated that families on modest incomes will be £18,000 worse off than jobless parents. So a family with 3 children that has at least one parent claiming universal credit will receive £46,000. Meanwhile, a family where both parents work with the average earnings will get only £28,000. In brief, do you think that is fair?
Well, look, what I think is fair is the decisions that we took overall at the budget, including on taxation.
I'm not asking what you think is fair overall. I'm asking whether you think that is that fair? Is it fair? It's a very simple question. Is it fair that if you have 3 children and on benefits, you have more money than if you have 3 children and you're working? Is that fair?
Well, look, one of the benefit changes that we made at the budget was around the 2-child limit, and 60% of families who would benefit from that lifting of the 2-child limit are in work. So they are working families, and they will be receiving extra support because of the lifting of the 2-child limit. And look, one of the things when I talk to people in my constituency about the 2-child limit is that people ask me very reasonable questions, saying, is this fair, and what's the policy on this? And when I start talking to people about it in detail, we get on to thinking about the children involved, the children, who didn't choose the family that they were going to be born into. These are children who we don't want to go to bed hungry. I don't want to live in a country where 1 in 10 teenagers goes hungry once a week because they can't afford food. And that's why we took the decision at the budget to list 550,000 children out of poverty, which is good for those children, but it's also an investment in the future of our country, because we know what damage poverty does to people's chances in life. What would
you say though to a family where 2 parents are working, 1 full-time, 1 part-time, with average wages, with 3 children, and they live next door to people who basically have almost a third more money than they do, but are not working? How would you say to them, oh, I'm sorry, that's just the way the cookies crumbled? How would you justify to them, listen, don't quit your jobs, we need you to carry on paying taxes, when actually they'd be better off if they did?
What I would say to that family is that you'll be getting £150 off your energy bill in April because of the changes that we've made. If you get prescriptions, those charges will be frozen because of choices we've made. If you take the train to work, your rail fares will be frozen because of changes that we made.
Well, that's great, but what if they don't want to take the train to work? Because it'd be more money for them if they didn't work. That's crazy, isn't it?
No, because the point is that they are getting help with the cost of living because of choices that we took.
But they would get more help if they weren't working.
The priorities in this budget were to cut the cost of living, to cut NHS waiting lists, and to cut government borrowing. And actually, one of the things that should annoy that family. Can I just say this point? Can I finish this point, please? One of the things that should annoy that family, and in fact everyone who pays taxes in this country,
has been very clear on this, and it has said categorically that it told the Treasury where you work weeks ago that there was a £4.2 billion surplus. So what happened between that briefing, which no doubt landed on the Chancellor's desk, one assumes on your desk, perhaps even under the purview of the Prime Minister himself? What happened between the moment that the OBR said that there was a £4.2 billion surplus and the moment that Rachel Reeves said that there was actually a £30 billion black hole? Explain to me how all of a sudden the narrative has changed.
Well, firstly, Rachel never said those words you just attributed. What Rachel did is give a speech in early November where she said that, look, there's a big challenge in terms of productivity as a result of mishandling of Brexit and other actions of the previous government. That's going to have an impact. She was very clear we needed to increase the headroom, which is absolutely true, and based on the fact that the headroom was very low at 4.2 billion, increasing it was a real priority for us as a government. And she was clear that everyone would have to make a contribution, and that's exactly what we did in terms of our budget decisions around taxation. So Rachel was clear in her speech in November about what the challenges were and what about this sort of rather
unusual, unprecedented press conference on the morning of the budget, and then this also rather unusual and unprecedented early release of the OBR's report. I wonder if they might be connected, and the leaking out of reports that there's a £30 billion black hole. It's all very murky.
Hang on, sorry. No, I'm really going to have to correct you on this, because you said the unprecedented publication, I think, of the OBR report before the budget. That was a mistake made by the OBR. They have taken responsibility for that. That is on them. That is their responsibility. It's a very serious matter. They are doing a review into it at the moment, and the review is going to report to us tomorrow, and we will then have a chance to consider what that says.
What about if there happens to be a review of the messaging coming out of the Treasury telling the country that we're not in a good place at all when the OBR has said there is a surplus? If there was an investigation into this and quite what was known by you and your colleagues compared to what was being given to the media and told to the general public, if that happens to be investigated, what might we find then?
Well, if people look at what happened, they will see that when we knew there was £4.2 billion of surplus, the forecast by the OBR at the end of October, at that stage, doing nothing was not an option. You know, we could not, that was not enough headroom to have. We were determined to get the headroom up substantially. That's really important to give the markets confidence. That's really important to make our public finances more secure, to bring down the cost of government borrowing. So just to be really clear, when the OBR said that the surplus was £4.2 billion, when they said that, they were taking into consideration the impact of their productivity downgrade, which has had a £16 billion hit on public finances. And with £4.2 billion of headroom, that is not enough. You know, doing nothing was not an option. And so we had to then go into the final weeks of the budget process when we started to consider our policy changes and make sure that we had that headroom of £21.7 billion, which is where we ended up.
If there happen to be people, because people think that Rachel Reeves lied, OK? This is what she's being accused of. The Shadow Chancellor wants her to be investigated over this. Mel Strider's asked the Financial Conduct Authority for a full investigation into possible market abuse. Let's say that goes ahead and something doesn't look right as a result of that investigation. You do realise that the maximum sentence for market manipulation is 7 years in prison. For conspiracy to defraud, 10 years in prison. This is very serious. The allegations being made against the Chancellor and indeed the Treasury in which you work are incredibly serious.
Well, I think some of the claims by the opposition are frankly just ridiculous. And you know, let's not forget that the reason why the Liz Truss money budget has such a devastating impact is because they didn't share information with the OBR. They weren't transparent about it. What we're doing as a government is having a full process of exchanging information with the OBR in arriving at our budget policies.
Final question. Would you welcome an investigation by the Financial Conduct Authority?
Look, I think this is a complete distraction. No.
I think this is an important question. James, this is an important question. You run the country's finances, of which I contribute, and I want to know if anything funny has gone on here. So I would like to see, I'd like those questions answered. And so I'm asking you, would you welcome an investigation by the Financial Conduct Authority, yes or no?
No, that's a ridiculous distraction by the Conservatives.
You don't want to be investigated over this.
Let me be really. You asked about your money that you pay in tax. You know, and one of my jobs as Chief Secretary of the Treasury is to make sure that every penny of public money is spent wisely, and that means rooting out waste and inefficiency. That's why we're getting rid of police and crime commissioners. That's why we've got back £70 million from dodgy asylum hotel contracts. That's why we've got back £400 million from COVID fraud, which was the result of contracts entered into under the previous government. That is how I make sure that your tax money is spent wisely.
I'm afraid it doesn't feel very wise to me from where I'm sitting, but thank you very much. I do appreciate you coming on and talking to us today.
What you just witnessed on TalkTV is the absolute collapse of the Labour Party's foundational economic myth. When a Treasury minister cannot explain why hard-working citizens take home less than those on welfare and outright dodges questions about official economic forecasts, you are watching an establishment caught in a deliberate fiscal deception. To understand why this exchange is so damning, you have to look at the timeline and the mathematical reality behind Labour's narrative. After taking power in July 2024, Chancellor Rachel Reeves immediately launched a coordinated media campaign claiming she had uncovered an unexpected $22 billion fiscal black hole. This manufactured crisis was systematically engineered for one specific reason: to pave the way for her October 30th autumn budget, which slammed the British public with a staggering $40 billion in tax increases, the largest single tax raid in modern history, crushing employers and small businesses with massive national insurance hikes. But here is the devastating fact that shatters Labour's entire smokescreen. The Office for Budget Responsibility, the government's own official independent economic watchdog, confirmed that prior to Reeves's budget interventions, the Treasury was actually sitting on a $4.2 billion surplus. So where did the alleged black hole come from? It was created by Labour's own discretionary spending choices, including handing out over $10 billion in immediate inflation-busting pay raises to their public sector trade union backers, without demanding a single productivity improvement in return. And as Alex Phillips brilliantly exposed using Center for Social Justice data, Labour has engineered a backward system where a working two-parent family can end up $18,000 worse off than a household subsisting entirely on state benefits. They aren't repairing the economy. They are actively penalizing hard-working taxpayers to subsidize a bloated welfare state and reward their political allies. The ruling class expects you to accept their manufactured crises without checking the math. But the era of unchecked establishment accounting is over. Thank you for watching Julian Discourse. If you refuse to let the political elite gaslight you about your own economic reality, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and I'll see you next time.